Don't you realize how racist you are? This is not an indictment, and you is the proverbial you. It's all of us. But it's a genuine question, albeit a rhetorical one, because I already know the answer. Before we can even tackle that question, we have to come to terms, we have to agree on some basic definitions. What is racism? One definition says prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is minority or marginalized, the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Now, obvious, glaring examples of racism are easy to identify and even fight against. But what about the more subtle ones? Even within ourselves. These can be even more insidious and damaging because they unconsciously contribute to the greater problem. And they prevent us from fully engaging in the fight against racism without us even really knowing why. In essence, we become our own worst enemy by not realizing and acknowledging our own racism. It's always them and the others that are easy to demonize. We need all of our collective awareness and strength to fight this battle. So, I say again, don't you see how racist you are? How racist we all are. I'm talking about us. We that are here tonight that want something better and that are fighting the good fight against racism. There are some minds and hearts that we just have to know are lost forever to racism. But ours here tonight are not. But we still need to look inward at us. Those of us who want to change and create change and make this battered country truly great again through love and peace, but who may still yet be hobbled by the lurking, creeping, insidious seeds of racism planted deep in our psyches by so many people for so long in so many ways, big and small. Racism is a sickness, contagious, like the coronavirus, infecting us a little bit from this person and that person, and we cannot heal a disease without first acknowledging we are sick. Oscar Hammerstein was ahead of his time when he wrote these lyrics for South Pacific in 1949. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. Carefully taught. Racism does have to be systematically taught and passed on from generation to generation, or better put, infected from person to person. We are not born racist. We're not born afraid of people who look differently and act differently than we do. It is simply not in our DNA. Sadly, though, it does seem to be in the DNA of this country. So much of which was built on the backs of black people. It's hard to extract racism from this country, almost like a person trying to change the color of their eyes. It is so hard to extract that we haven't managed to do it in over 400 years. Unfortunately, this is a racist country. My work takes me to lots of different places in the world. My colleagues in the UK, Belgium, Germany, and other places have reached out to me recently with absolute astonishment at the level of racism in this country. I got this message from a colleague in Germany just last week. We see some messages about racism and discrimination on the news, read it in the papers, but I never ever could imagine the difference between Europe and the US. Recent weeks have shown that racism against black people is very open and a daily abuse, and I still can't get my head around it, how something that awful can be such a normal part of society. A normal part of society. Our society. The fight against racism is the longest war this country has ever been in, and to defeat it, we have to do a self-analysis, just as we would in any other battle. What are our strengths and our weaknesses? What weapons do we have? What kind of soldiers are we? Honestly, looking at ourselves can be a painful exercise, one that so many of us are either not willing or able to do, but it is necessary. Despite our willingness or unwillingness to self-reflect, the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others have forced the mirror in front of our faces yet again. And if white and BIPOC have to work together to fight racism, which we do, our reflection is showing us we haven't really been ready for this battle. Why? Because too many of us spend so much time in righteous indignation, denying we're racist, that we don't realize how racist we actually are. This is a flaw and a weakness. I know you don't know how racist you are. Why? Because I say Black Lives Matter and you respond with All Lives Matter. Lord, I have unfriended and deleted and blocked more people than I ever thought I ever had on Facebook. Look, the fight against racism has always required strong warriors, black and white. We need your strength now. People can't be so weak and insecure to be afraid that their privilege is somehow going to crumble if we stop for just a minute to remind the world that our lives matter. Two. Not only, but two. You are not diminished by lifting someone else up. It makes you stronger. The tone of All Lives Matter sounds to us like, sure, we can acknowledge you exist and even acknowledge that you have some unique challenges as long as you don't forget whose lives really matter and who is really in charge. All Lives Matter smacks of scolding us for not being grateful for some imaginary way this country has somehow demonstrated that Black Lives Matter. Well, it hasn't. Never fear, privileged ones. American culture does not allow us to forget the positions white people hold in this society. Don't you see? All Lives Matter is just another way to hold down black people, to keep us in our place. Remember the definition, so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Well, I have news for you. This is not some 19th century plantation, and you most definitely are not in charge. Whether you're stopping me for a broken taillight or whether you post something stupid on social media, you are not in charge. You don't need to remind us that all lives matter, but we need to remind you that all lives can't matter as long as it's clear to us that ours don't. If all lives matter, prove it. You don't know how racist you are because you diligently curate and collect and create one-off videos, memes, and news stories of individual heinous acts of violence perpetrated by some black people as some sort of example of the fact that violence and brutality are carried out by black people too. See? Black people don't even know how to treat other black people. Why should we care? Or even worse, see? Savages. By doing this, you are marginalizing us as the other. These posts become tokens to confirm your bias and perpetuate an image of black people no better than the black-faced savages characterized by D.W. Griffith in Birth of a Nation over 100 years ago. Is this how far we've come? Do you think we're not aware of black-on-black crime? You wave it like a flag as if it is some excuse for generations of oppression. As if a crime committed by a black person suddenly absolves you of your responsibility to face your racism. You don't know how racist you are because you focus on George Floyd's criminal record and say, if they don't break the law, there won't be any trouble. We're not claiming George Floyd was a hero or a saint. His death and so many others are symbols of so many others before him and some even after him. It is a symptom of the much bigger sickness, economic, legal, social, that is racism. Legal scholar Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, said, people are swept into the criminal justice system, particularly in poor places. They are swept up for often minor crimes. They are incarcerated, and when they are released, every right that they have fought for is stripped from them. Like the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, the right to be free of legal discrimination and employment, and access to education and public benefits. Many of the old forms of discrimination that we supposedly left behind during the Jim Crow era are suddenly legal again. We cannot continually set up systems that systematically keep black people down and then wag our fingers in judgment at the way they respond to survive. Just as some bad cops don't represent all cops, some bad black people don't represent all of us. And I've mentioned social media quite a bit, and social media posts may seem frivolous or petty to you. If so, your age is showing. Look at the power of young people. The TikTok and K-pop generations that are rumored to have disrupted that debacle in Tulsa last weekend is just one example. Look at how things were interfered with and manipulated in 2016 and how they continue to be. Social media is an important field of engagement. The power of viral memes and stories, false or true, cannot be overstated. Dismiss it at your own peril. You don't know how racist you are because you focus on the symptoms and not the disease. Symptoms like burning buildings and toppled monuments. One post I saw recently said, we can remove flags and statues all day, but until we figure out how to remove the hate in people's hearts, nothing will change. Your history, our American history, is not going anywhere. But there are symbols of pain and hate still flying high in this country. Do they really represent history, or do they just confirm your bias? You want to preserve history? Make black studies a requirement in schools. Teach children who Emmett Till was and what happened at the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. If displaying something that symbolizes hate and pain to an entire race of people, from a Confederate flag to a Chief Wahoo logo that you so proudly display on your cap, get rid of it. Even music groups have changed their names, like Lady A, formerly Lady Antebellum, and the Chicks, formerly the Dixie Chicks. Props to them. Why does it hurt you to not hurt someone else? put these things in museums as reminders of what once was, but doesn't have to be anymore. I grew up here in Berea on Wesley Drive on the North End, so affectionately referred to as Little Africa. Berea was a wonderful place to grow up in, and even in Little Africa, there were amazing white families. They were there, and they were a central part, and they are a central part of my life still. The Causeys and the Hops and the Delatories. Our neighborhoods in the North End were wonderful because of strong, brilliant, activist families like the Neelys and the Paynes and the North Berea Action Group and People's Community Church and First Baptist Church on Pearl Street. But racism has always been in this town and in neighboring Brook Park and Middleburg Heights too, and certainly in Parma. I remember as a kid there was a white family that lived in the neighborhood with us. They had an amazing swing set. I mean, this thing was a deluxe playground. It made any kid's mouth water. Us black kids would be playing right alongside with the white kids, but black people were not allowed at this house to play on the swing set. The father there didn't like black people. I can only imagine this man's frustration at whatever economic conditions forced him to live among us in this lower to middle income, mostly black neighborhood. That incredible playground proved to be just a little too much temptation for the white kids we'd be playing with. And they would leave us to play as we were left to watch through the fence. I remember this like it was yesterday. I have to tell you, as I watch the unrest in this country, I can't help but think of so much of it as a giant playground so many of us aren't allowed to play on. Destruction is not the answer. Hurting other people's livelihoods is not the answer. But understand it as the symptom it is. Empathize with the hurt and the pain. Because I can honestly say that if I saw that playground today, I would have to fight the urge to want to burn it down too. But there is hope. People like all of you coming here tonight and continuing the fight long after tonight fills my heart with hope. My parents were shining examples of racial hope. A young white woman from Connecticut and a young black man from Pennsylvania who came to Baldwin Wallace in the 60s, fell in love and got married at a time when interracial marriage was still illegal in most states. I was born in 1966, 1 year before Loving versus Virginia gave interracial couples the right to marry in this country. I have thought about the struggles that my parents faced my entire life. They marched for civil rights, and they saw Berea as a progressive place, a college town with amazing people in the BW community and elsewhere that loved them and supported them to raise their mixed family. My mother never left, and she lived in Berea until she died a few years ago. Our community embraced us, and she taught us that love is love, no matter your skin color. I saw hope on a NASCAR track this week as the field rallied around Bubba Wallace. I see peaceful protests happening all over the world. This gives me hope. To the police, thank you for the unimaginably hard work you do every day to keep the world safe. I do believe the overwhelming majority of police are good people who want to do the right things. And I believe that by working together, we can weed out racist police and brutality and work towards meaningful change and reform. We need your help to defeat racism too. We can win this war once we see how racist we really are how sick we are, we can heal and change. Then take action. Vote, not just at the national level, but locally as well. Pay attention. Elect people of color. Hire people of color. Cast people of color. Put people of color on your boards of directors and think tanks, not just because they're BIPOC, but because they're brilliant and qualified and bring different cultural perspectives to your companies and organizations and communities that can only make them stronger and our country stronger. And keep peacefully protesting and talking and making your voices heard. The world is hearing us. We're tired. As Desiree said, we are tired. But that's what they're counting on. We've been tired for 400 years. But we are powerful warriors. And we will never stop fighting to defeat racism wherever it exists, from right here in Berea to every corner of the world. Thank you. God bless. Black Lives Matter.